I'm going to present on Schaeffer Shelter. The name of this presentation is Schaeffer Shelter Through the Years. I'm going to chronologically take us through all of the artifacts that were found at this site. The photo there shows Stanley Schaeffer in 1953 positioned in front of the site. And Jack Hughes took that photo. So I know what y'all are all here to see. Bear with me, and we'll get to the artifacts as quick as I can. So the setting and physical description, I set this up to give you all a point of reference for where this is. Ironically, it's not far at all from where Chris was just presenting on. Chris is down here somewhere, and we've got Schaeffer Shelter right here. So northeast of Happy, southeast of Canyon, near the head of Cita Canyon. And here it is again, just to show you within South Cita Canyon where its position is. So yeah, it's right up here near the head of the canyon. And I think anybody traveling down into the canyon or traveling up out of the canyon would see it. It would be very hard to miss. So I'm sure y'all weren't expecting to see the Dust Bowl in this presentation, but I believe it is relevant. April 14th, 1935, Black Sunday, a huge dust storm came in and covered everything basically in the Texas Panhandle and Oklahoma Panhandles. It nearly buried Schaeffer Shelter, that along with other Dust Bowl storms, and the fact that the roof of the front of the shelter had collapsed. So there's boulders in front of it that are getting blow sand and soil deposited on them during the Dust Bowl. And I think that explains why it looked the way it did when Stanley found it. He described it as having a thin opening, wide, but narrow, like it was almost covered up. You could just kind of peek your head in and tell that there was something else back there. And that was what inspired him to dig it out and see what was inside. Now, the previous investigation before I got involved, Jack Hughes worked on this site after Stanley Schaeffer and Claude Money excavated the interior of the shelter. They took the collection to the Panhandle Plains Historical Museum. Jack Hughes had just gotten there and taken over as archaeologist and paleontologist, and came out here, visited the site, took some notes, I think made some surface collections, didn't excavate at that time, but 15 years later he did come back and excavate in 1967, and this is his excavation. On the top right of the map there, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Those are the 5 test units that he excavated in a trench along what he called the porch of Schaeffer Shelter. So this would have been outside the shelter, but definitely in close proximity and share some of the same stratigraphy. So he excavated those. 1, 2, and 3 were very shallow. It was mostly either backfill from the excavation by Stan and Claude, or it was disturbed soil, and again, very thin. But when you get into test unit 4 and 5, the soil gets much deeper there. There's a considerable depression in the floor, in the bedrock there. And he even described there being a pocket in the bedrock with a tunnel cut into it. So this dashed representation, that represents the cut tunnel that he described. I assume he says cut, so that implies it was made intentionally, and something like that I would assume is for storage, trying to hide something or cache something for later use. You can see a couple of the rocks that fell from the roof there. You can also see a pothole near those rocks. And let's see, I think that's pretty much it for this slide. So the artifacts, over the course of from 1952 to 1967, repeated field visits, so picking up things on the surface in the shelter, and the excavation that Claude Money and Stanley Schaeffer did, and the excavation that Jack Hughes did, all combined. There's 3,594 total items. Of those, 1,385 of those are actually formal artifacts. 457 of those are projectile points, preforms, and fragments. We had 353 scrapers and scraper fragments, 217 knives and knife fragments, 64 ceramic sherds, 31 worked bone artifacts, and 9 worked shell artifacts, in addition to 254 other artifacts, drills, spoke shaves, various things like that. And the 2,209 that are mentioned up there, those are faunal remains or unworked wood or shell or bone that was collected, mineral samples, things like that. So, at the site, there are 7 individual archaeological periods represented, starting in the Middle Archaic from 4000 BC to 2000 BC and going all the way through the historic period. So we've got late archaic, transitional archaic, woodland, late prehistoric, protohistoric, and historic occupations at this site. And I'm going to go through each one of those, starting with the earliest. So this is the earliest, or it's at least one of the earliest things from the site. It's one of the Middle Archaic points. It's just a stem and base, but it is enough to say that it's an Andice point. The measurements are unique to Andice, and I also took it to Don Wyckoff, who's an expert in Calf Creek lithic technology, and he confirmed that this is an Andice point. And these are dated from a very tight window, a very short-lived culture called the Calf Creek Horizon, that existed from about 4010 BC to 3750 BC. So the Calf Creek Horizon, I thought initially, and told the Schaeffers just as recently as last week, that that was the first Andice point ever found in the Texas Panhandle. And at the time I thought it was. It is not the first, but it is still exceedingly rare. Other Calf Creek Horizon artifacts have also been found in the Texas Panhandle. This is not an Andice or Andes point. That's a Calf Creek from Stinnett. There are a variety of Calf Creek artifacts from Oldham County. And Greer County, Oklahoma, there's this tiny little Calf Creek related point that is pretty unusual. But there's something like it at Schaeffer Shelter that I'm wondering if those are not the same thing. I was not able to fit that artifact on the right into any neat category, so I'm wondering if maybe it is one of these. So this shows the Southern High Plains counties that have Calf Creek Horizon sites in them. So Dallam County up here, we've got Lipscomb, Hutchinson, oh gosh, you're making an Arkansas boy remember all the counties of the Texas Panhandle, Oldham County, and Wheeler County. And so those 5 counties did have reported Calf Creek Horizon artifacts from them. However, Randall County did not, so we get to add that to the list. Now there are 6 counties, and it's the first one that's in the Caprock Canyon lands, and certainly the first one that's close to Palo Duro Canyon. So it is unique, and it represents something that we haven't seen before. So the rest of the Middle Archaic artifacts include Pandell points, which are also very early Middle Archaic points, generally associated with South Texas and southeastern to eastern, east central New Mexico. And we also had Clear Fork gouges. Now these begin being made in the late Paleo-Indian times, but that's not what we have here. What we've got are middle to late Archaic Clear Fork gouges. They're a little bit smaller, and they're bifacially worked. Sorry. So moving on to the late Archaic, we have a lot of points from the late Archaic. The occupations in the Middle Archaic were apparently very sparse, infrequent, but when we get to the late Archaic, there's much more frequent occupation of the shelter. We see Marshall points, which I believe we have at least 3, possibly more of those. palmillus points, which we have 2 or 3. I'm not sure. That one that I think could be Calf Creek Horizon, I'm not sure that maybe that's palmillus also. I'm still looking into that. This is still ongoing research, by the way. Williams points, we have 2 or 3 of those from the site, and we have 1 or 2 Marcos points as well. So we've got a pretty good representation of late archaic artifacts from the site, including Castroville. I'm not entirely sure what this one is yet. There's a few things that it could be. Don Wyckoff suggested it was a Ray point. It could be an Ellis point, it could be a Bell point. I'm really not sure. I'm still looking into this one. It's been confounding. It's been reworked, and I think some of the characteristics have been napped off, so it's hard to tell. And we also have Edgewood points from the late archaic at the site. So getting into the transitional archaic, we had several Ellis points, at least 6 or 7, possibly more. There are some of these dark points are so fragmentary that it's very difficult to tell. In some cases, they're specific type. But we also have Matamoros-like dart points or extremely large arrow points. It's very, very large. So I really hesitated to call it a Fresno. I think it's a Matamoros-like dart point or knife. The Enzor over there, we had 2 or 3 Enzors in the collection also. There were 3 Matamoros and yeah, I think 6 or 7 Ellis. So these are thick cord mark sherds from the site. I'm not entirely sure of the date. There's some conflicting research on thick cord marked pottery, and some of the evidence suggests that thick cord marked pottery is from the Woodland period. Some suggest it's from transitional Plains Village period, and we don't really know for sure, so I can't say for certain, but they could be from the Woodland. And the Woodland is when arrow point technology comes into play. We've abandoned the atlatl and dart points, and now we're using arrows. We had 1 Moran point from the site. We had 1 or 2 Bonham points from the site. There were 14 deadmans, or about. I should have put the little about in front of there. Roughly 14 deadmans and 14 Scalorn. Again, there are some fragmentary ones that are just difficult to say for sure. Late prehistoric, we get into these arrow points, which the bulk of the collection is late prehistoric. It was heavily occupied. Schaeffer Shelter was almost constantly occupied during the late prehistoric, it appears. We have young points, which start at the tail end of the Woodland, but go into the late prehistoric and even into the protohistoric period. We had 14 of those. We had 56 Ouachita points. We had 128 Fresno points, which granted there could be a few in there that might be thumbnail scrapers. I'm not sure, they could be. There are a couple that there might be something. There's some star-like points in there, but star is such a southern Texas point that I hesitate to call them that. I think they're Fresno points that just have a concave base and look like a star point. And then we also had 30 Harrell points that came from the site as well. So there were 217 total knives, as I mentioned earlier. We had 4 bevel Harahay knives in significant quantity. Most of them are fragments. I didn't actually reanalyze the knives for this project, so I don't have precise numbers on all of those. But we also had double bevel knives in the collection. And these come from about the same time period, generally speaking, although double bevel knives are often associated with Toya culture in southern Texas, more so than up here in the Panhandle, so it was a little unusual. In the late prehistoric ceramics, we've got Borger cord marked, at least 33 sherds, potentially as many as 48. We have a total of 48 cord marked sherds. And 15 of those are thick and kind of in that indeterminate where I can't say for sure if they're Borger or if they're something else, a variant or a predecessor of Borger. We also had 3 sherds of Hornata Brown. We had a single sherd of Gila cliff variety, plain utility, smudged, and Hornata plain slipped red. We had a single sherd of that. And I should put possible in front of all these southwestern ceramics because I'm not a southwesternist. So I did the best I could with these. I think that's what these are, and I believe they are that, but I can't say with 100% certainty. Now this is interesting. We found this and really didn't know what it was at first. I mean, we knew it was a pendant, a stone pendant, but it's been months of research trying to eliminate things and figure out what it actually is. We thought it was kaolinite for months, but I spoke with Bob Maloof and another colleague down at Sul Ross State who are much more familiar with kaolinite pendants than I am, and they said this did not look like kaolinite. It was far too large and heavy, and it had 2 holes instead of 1. So I do not believe it's from South Texas. We wondered if it was kaolinite from the eastern woodlands because sometimes there are kaolinite pendants produced in places such as Georgia that are traded away. But no, I went and took it to Chuck Hood, who knows much more about geology than I do, to get his opinion on it. And he said he thought it was unsilicified dolomite. And we began to look at all the different characteristics and its density and the way it reacts to vinegar to eliminate the chance of it being limestone or caliche. Everything was consistent with dolomite. So we think it's an unsilicified dolomite pendant. And I can find nothing else in the literature that is even remotely close to this. And I've asked all the local experts. I've asked Paul, I've asked Chris, I've asked Scott Marsowski and Don Wyckoff and a number of other people, and nobody's ever seen anything like it. So we believe this is a truly unique item to this site. And there was clearly some kind of imagery, some kind of designs or etching incisions on this. And it's hard to see from this photo, and since I have limited time, I didn't get into all of this, but in my article, there will be de-stretch experiments where I tried to enhance the imagery on this. I think there might be a bird on this side, maybe. And you'll have to see the article. I don't have time to get into it, but I think there might be a bird here. There's something going on over here. I'm not sure. I kind of wonder if it might be a wanyu, the horned serpent, or feathered serpent, but I'm really not sure yet. I'm still working on it. So in the late prehistoric, we also had quite a few exotic artifacts. We had 3 turquoise artifacts, including this turquoise bead fragment, which, as you can see, is tiny. It's less than ½ a centimeter in diameter. There's also a pendant fragment, which is turquoise. It's just kind of a light, almost cream, light, minty colored turquoise. And there's a pendant fragment over here, really beautiful turquoise pendant fragment. We also had 3 olivella shell beads. These come from the Pacific coast, possibly Baja California, somewhere in that area. Also obsidian, 37 obsidian artifacts, including these 3. Most of them were flakes, but we've got this one, which I believe is a pendant. It looks like it might have been an arrow point, but then you notice here, it's got a notch right there in the center where you would drill a hole if you were going to make that a pendant. So I believe that was a pendant. I think this is either a pendant or just a fragment of another stone tool that's broken off. And this one in the middle, I'm not sure. It could be an arrow point or it could be a pendant. This also has a little bit of a notch right there. So I'm not sure if it was strung up around the neck or put on an arrow. We also had a single redstone pipe fragment that came from this site. And we're not entirely sure of the source just yet. That's something I want to look into further, but we think it's probably from Kansas, probably a Kansas pipestone. The last of the, I think the last of the late prehistoric artifacts, or at least the exotic artifacts, are these ceramics, which we had 5 sherds that I believe are Agua Fria glaze on red, which is a Rio Grande Glaze A ceramic. And we had a single sherd of biscuitware also, which was pretty interesting. I'd never seen that before. Moving on into the protohistoric, we had a single Perdiz point. The protohistoric, it's a very thin lens of evidence. It does not look like this was occupied very heavily during the protohistoric, but we do have some. There were some people there, at least infrequently. One Perdiz point, one or two Garza points, and we have one or two, I think two, Ocate micaceous, what I believe to be Ocate micaceous, which is an Apachean ceramic from the protohistoric. Then we get into the historic area. So we had square nails and a firearm fragment, what we believe to be an internal component of a firearm. Stoneware crock sherd, and then we had a single iron trade point. In the form of this point, and from the references I've looked at, it appears that this was probably made by a blacksmith and not indigenous made. It seems like it was filed pretty symmetrically, parallel file marks on the stem. Yeah, the evidence seems to suggest it's probably made by a blacksmith. So we also had age indeterminate artifacts. We had quite a bit of worked bone from the site, 31 artifacts or artifact fragments. I pictured two of those, two of the best. There is a bone awl here that shows quite a bit of wear there, use wear on the tip. And this, I would have struggled to figure out what this was, but Chris figured it out, Chris Lentz. He said this is a weaving implement for making basketry. And you can see all the striations on it and the way they're moving. It makes perfect sense. I think he's exactly right that that's what that is. We had 18 drills that came from the site. So these are drill fragments showing the bits. Tip is broken off of that one. And this is an interesting one. This is a drill that would have had 3 bits. It would have had one coming out here, one coming out here, and one coming out over here. Actually, no, here. Those 2 ways and that way. Sorry. But yeah, that would have been a very interesting tool to find intact. There were 353 scrapers in the collection, most of them end scrapers, some side scrapers, and thumbnail scrapers also. There were 9 worked shell artifacts, including 2 pendants, or 2 pendants that I wanted to highlight anyway. This one is pretty standard. It's local mussel shell, and it's something we tend to find at Plains Village sites in the Southern Plains. This one's a little more unusual. I've not seen one quite like this before. It was obviously like rectangular in shape. This is slightly less than half of it. You can see the hole right there. So it's very, very small, just over a ½ centimeter in width. So very small. Maybe you should call it a bead instead of a pendant even. It's hard to say. So we sourced the obsidian. We wanted to know where this was coming from, and I sent that to Matthew Bullinger at SMU. He took the 37 obsidian samples that we had. He ran XRF analysis on them, determined that all of them come from the Jemez Mountains in New Mexico. 31 of the 37 came from Cerro Toledo rhyolitic obsidian, which is 84% of the obsidian in the collection. And then 16% of the obsidian, or 6 specimens, were determined to be Valle rhyolite, or Cerro del Medio, as it's more commonly known. So to give you an idea of what Bullinger was working with, this is his database, and it shows the number of samples he has by how large the circle is, and the colors determine which source these obsidian samples came from. And as you can see, the Jemez Mountains are right around here. So as you can see, these green or turquoise looking circles are closest to the Jemez Mountains. Makes perfect sense. There was quite a bit of Jemez Mountain obsidian being brought over to these areas. We also did a LiDAR scan of this, the entire property. So Mark Willis came out on January 11th and 12th, and we did 2 LiDAR scans. He scanned 2,022 acres the first day. That's the red perimeter there. And the second day was a more targeted LiDAR survey of just the canyon and the periphery of the canyon. We cut out all the agricultural fields and disturbed areas just to make sure we had good coverage and to get the data from a number of directions and try to increase the resolution. So that's what we flew, and this is just a still image. I'm not able to show you the LiDAR data right now, but that's a still image of it, and it turned out beautiful. It's very pretty. We've only really just begun to look at it, and we're hopeful that we'll be able to find many more sites on the LiDAR data. We know there are other sites in the area, and we're hoping to find them, in the data, and potentially new ones in the data as well. We don't know what all will turn up, but I'm eager to dig into that and see what comes up. We're actually going on Monday to West Texas A&M. They have a 270-degree new classroom called Igloo Vision, it's Buffalo Vision, and it basically creates a 3D rendering. It's like the sphere in Las Vegas. It's like a 3D rendering of the world around you, so you can go different places and do different things and see from different angles you couldn't see from. And they have been working on converting that to being usable in the igloo. And Monday, we were supposed to go see that for the first time. So very excited to see that imagery in the igloo. That's going to be an experience. So the initial results, it seems that Schaeffer Shelter was a key stop on a common route that connected the Llano Estacano to the Caprock Canyonlands and the Red Bed Plains to the east. The Caprock Canyonlands were basically an oasis in the plains. There's clean, reliable water, abundant game. You've got high concentrations of wood, wild edibles that grow in the area. And the water to the east is often unpalatable. There's a lot of gypsum water in that direction. And the water up on the Llano Estacado to the west is unpredictable. You got playa lakes, and that's about it. So if unless you find one with a spring, there's no guarantee there'll be any water there at all. And this welcoming environment clearly helps to explain why there's such a diversity of materials at this site and why there were so many repeated occupations. Some more initial results are that Middle Archaic bison hunters were using Schaeffer Shelter as a brief campsite while they were following bison herds around on the hunt. Schaeffer Shelter would also have served as a great base camp for nomadic or seasonally migratory cultural groups. Late Archaic and woodland cultures in particular may have used it this way. More or less consistently occupied during the late prehistoric. There's Plains Village, at least one Plains Village culture there, and very heavily represented. The evidence is very skewed towards them in terms of quantity. And some of the ceramics and projectile points may indicate that there was use of the shelter by a transitional Plains Village culture, which is something I've been researching for the last few years. I think there's something between the woodland and Plains Village, a kind of incipient Plains Village culture that wasn't really around or recognizable for very long, but maybe 100 or 150 years. And some of those thicker cord mark ceramics could be associated with that culture. And some teasers for the article. We'll have more analysis of the LiDAR in the article. I will include the experimentation with D-stretch that I've done. I tried it on a lot of stuff. It's really designed for rock art, but I've used it on ceramics. I used it on the pendant, the dolomite pendant, bone artifacts and shell artifacts, as well as pipestone, and I might use it on other stuff as well. It's great for highlighting incisions and cut marks and things like that. And I'm also doing some experimental archaeology with some lithic materials that I found on the Schaeffer property, up in the northwest corner of that property. I'm wondering if it's Macy silcrete. It's some sort of Ogallala gravel type. I'm not entirely sure, but I'm trying to research that a little bit more also. And there will definitely be future presentations on Schaeffer Shelter. This research is not done. So the future presentations will feature the LiDAR analysis of that whole 2,022 acres, radiocarbon dating some samples from Schaeffer Shelter, those 2 deepest test units that Jack Hughes dug. We have radiocarbon samples, some organic samples from those that we intend to test. An investigation into H17, which is a historic dugout, sometime late 1870s, I believe, that's associated with the T-Anchor Ranch and is not far at all from Schaeffer Shelter, within quarter mile or less probably. We'll also looking into doing an investigation into a thick midden that exists in the valley just below Schaeffer Shelter. Comparative analysis of rock shelters in the Caprock Canyon lands, particularly those in and around Palo Duro Canyon, to see how they compare with Schaeffer Shelter. And also some obsidian sourcing and further documentation of another campsite that's to the east of Schaeffer Shelter on the south side of South Cita Canyon. So now it's into acknowledgements, and I'm going to try to make this as quick as possible. It's been a very collaborative project and tons of people involved. If I miss anyone, I apologize. But I definitely want to thank everyone in this picture. Jerry Schaeffer and Stanley Schaeffer there on the right. I couldn't be more grateful to them for funding this research and you know, getting this shelter, getting this data out into the public. It's a really significant site, and people need to be aware of it. Veronica Arias and Miranda Bible have been a huge help to me at PPHM. Andy Burcham has been a big help to me along the way, always eager to help in any way he can. And Chris Lentz has been a huge help to me in this project and many others before. Basically a mentor of sorts for me. So I appreciate y'all's attendance, and we recreated that picture, Stan. So hope y'all like that.